Friday, October 15th, 2021. I'm going to open up the meeting, and the first thing is the approval of the agenda. Not much on there. I don't think anybody have anything else that they'd like to add. I don't see any hands, so we will approve the agenda by consensus. And late items, anything there, Sophie? Okay, thanks, sorry. And we'll move right into new business then. And 2.1 is a diverse housing recommendations from the Housing Advisory Committee. And I suspect that's going over to Robin. I could be wrong.
I think it is me. Oh boy. Okay, welcome everybody. All right, I'm gonna see if I can manage my screens here so I'm not looking off to the side for the whole of this presentation. So if I do glance over the side to look at your faces. Thanks for everybody. We've been doing, I hope, some good work lately at the Housing Advisory Committee, and we were asked by our representative, by Councillor Nicholson, to put together these recommendations and come to committee of the whole to just discuss them openly with council, and hopefully some, if not all, of these are appealing, and that we could actually move them forward to start kind of moving this housing agenda forward. So I don't know if I haven't done one of these before, so I don't know if I need to read verbatim from the report. I don't think that I do. And Daniel's not here, so maybe he would traditionally kind of open it. But maybe what I'll do is jump into the recommendations. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, I'm seeing nodding of heads. So, and just jump in if there's any questions as we're going through them. So the first one is to set housing targets. So this is the rationale being to set measurable goals to guide policy decisions, provide a way to measure and monitor success, and adjust strategies over time as needed. So I'm sure a number of municipalities have set these. I know City of Vancouver, I'm pretty sure Squamish has. I haven't had time, unfortunately, to research a bunch of them and bring you examples, but this sort of sets the tone. These are a lot of high-level recommendations of things that we know are going on. And what we're hoping at the end of this meeting is that council can give us direction, again, as to some or all that they want us to pursue. And then whether it's through planning staff and or with the help of the Housing Advisory Committee, or if we do it as subcommittees, we can then take on, doing some more research, creating some more reports, finding that information and bringing it back to you. So a lot of these are just very high-level ideas and open for discussion. So the idea behind this one is to set some housing targets. So that would be because we're, as a committee, we're trying to find ways to create diverse housing for people of all varying incomes, lifestyle, age groups. So it's not just about, the quote unquote affordable housing. It's about all the different diverse housing, people who want to age on the island and need different kinds of housing, young families, all sorts of different people need different kinds of housing that we're struggling to provide at the moment. So creating some targets would be the way that we'd want to, again, that just helps set policy decisions. And as we know, there's elections come and go and different councillors cycle in and out. So if we actually set these targets, then it's something for everybody to sort of strive towards and also adjust over time, over the years as things happen, then you adjust them as needed and set new goals. Yeah, sorry, so if I missed your hands, it's because I'm looking this way, not that way. So David, I'm seeing a hand.
Thanks, Robin. I mean, this seems like I like the words you just used. As we tend to think of it just as, affordable housing at one sort of chunk of the problem, but it's really quite a variety of different areas where we need new forms of housing, housing that's appropriate for different groups. But I guess my question, we could do this based on the needs analysis to some degree, but I guess I worry about it being so specific. And I guess I would ask a question to Daniel to say, if Daniel's managed to get back on, how hard would it be to do this, based on the needs analysis? Or I could ask anyone, if anyone has actually thought of trying to do this. I mean, the needs analysis talks about these different, the different types of housing that we need for different groups, but to turn that into actual numbers or sort of a range of numbers, has anyone tried to do it?
So there's a whole bunch of hands. I think Allison might have been first, and then Mayor Andrew and then Maureen.
Well, I was just going to say, from a perspective of having been on the first housing working group, we set up it was easy to do in a way for the purchase housing for the affordable, because we set up a wait list and a pre-screening criteria. And so the wait list gave us an idea of who was looking for what. And that, I think, was partly used by Belterra when they decided, you know, what mix to do for their affordable units. So short of actually specifically polling people, I don't know how we figure out, you know, with the rental, we didn't do a wait list because rental, everybody wants it within 30 days. It's not something that, you know, you can plan out that, yes, in a year from now, I'll be ready to buy this house and stuff like that. So I'm just not quite sure how one would do it, other than in more general terms.
Yeah, I mean, I could jump in, but Mayor Andrew, do you want to, did you want to comment?
Yeah, it's just a comment reading through it. I just, references to places like Vancouver. I understand the premise that we have to have targets. There's no question. The targets are very movable, unfortunately, but our situation on the island, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. We've got to have targets, but you know, we are an island. We've got limited land reserves. Unless we go to the public and go that route. And yeah, there's not a lot of money like there is in Vancouver and that sort of thing. So that part of it, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but we have to be very conscious of those restrictions going in, that's all. But I think it's a great idea, but it's a real moving target. There's no question about that. Those are just comments. Yeah.
And if I can just jump in, just from what I sort of inferred from what you said there, these targets aren't necessarily to be about the municipality developing these at all. It's meant to be in general. These are so for example, if we said by 2030, we want to see 40, you know, family style townhouse units developed, period. Like that was one of our targets. That's not for you know, for the municipality to develop. That's a target we're setting for likely private developers and possibly nonprofits. So it's more overarching for the community. It's not necessarily even speaking to who's necessarily going to build them. And to your sort of point, Alison, it could be ownership, it could be rental. It's not really about, and those could be part of those goals, is different rental unit numbers, different ownership numbers. Some we could say we want to be non-market, others we could say could be market, because I think we need a whole variety of things. So and I think some of the ones that have come up in our past meetings are also about being aware of the limits of the island, of the resources, of the water, all of those things, of course. So, but we have to start somewhere. I mean, I think it's a huge chunk if we sort of say that we're, you know, like planning for every single thing. And that's really, I think, what the OCP is about. And I don't think we want to take that on at this stage. But ours is more about coming from a housing perspective. These would be targets we are setting for, you know, X number of years from now. These are the types of units we'd like to see. I think that's kind of what we're aiming for. And I completely take the feedback. Obviously, we're not City of Vancouver with those resources. So, you know, likely ours will be a simplified, really simplified, you know, set of targets. We're not going to be nearly as comprehensive as they are. But Councillor Nicholson, I think you were up next.
Yeah, just to finish off there, I agree with you 100%, Robin, but it is, we do have a land shortage for that sort of thing. So we have to get into some land use changes and that sort of thing, and rezonings if we want to do this. Yeah.
And this would set those targets, right?
Absolutely.
And then it would make it clear to the community as well what we're looking for, the development community.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, carry on.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Daniel here now. Is there any chance David could ask his questions again? And we've lost you.
Yeah, hi, sure. Daniel, so setting these targets, and I just turned my screen off because my internet is unstable. We've got another Zoom meeting going on in another room. But so I really like the idea of targets, and for all sorts of different types of, you know, some could be market, some could be non-market, you know, different groups that need different types of housing than what we offer. But I just worry about how hard this would be, and it was sort of directed to you, Daniel, from taking the needs analysis that was done. Would it be reasonable to try to set targets, or is it a little bit too general? The material we have, is that a little bit too general?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first of all, I just want to apologize for being late and fighting with some computer issues here, but I don't know if I have a concrete answer, David, until sort of we would get into it, I guess. Like I know the housing needs assessment did produce some targets based on unit type. And I think it would be expanding on that information and looking at, okay, what are targets, and it, some of it I think depends on what level of target or what stage of target it wants to be. Because to some extent, it's like, well, the building of units is hard for council to control. So you can say, well, we want to see this many number of units built. Well, maybe that's not realistic because it's not something directly, council can control if people decide to develop land or not. Or maybe it's a target that says, well, in rezonings, we want to aim to see, this ratio of units or something. It might look more something like that, but yeah, but I don't know what I fully know how involved it would be until we got into it.
Just a bit more, Daniel. I mean, you might have missed a little bit that Robin said, but yeah, it's not necessarily saying the municipality would do this. This is for the private sector, for whoever's doing, a rezoning and offering some new homes. But it would be for us to think of ways, and some of these are further down on our agenda today, ways where we could facilitate the kinds of things that we need, the kinds of hitting the kinds of targets. What do we need to do from a policy perspective to encourage those? And so the targets just sort of help us. We look at our policies and we say, the trouble is we don't know how to get to, such and such a target for such and such a group. That sort of presents us a policy challenge, that's all. So
yeah,
thank you.
and I think in general, David, too, I guess I'm a big believer in measuring it and setting targets. Even it lets you know what's going on and lets you see and track it. And then sort of what gets tracked is what becomes important. So if council's saying something's important to track it, then we're sort of more aware of what's going on.
Yeah, thanks.
Councillor Nicholson, I think you were next, and then we've got Councillor Kale and Fast.
Yeah, I can comment on targets. I think that we would be able to pull them together relatively easily once the work is underway. But I think what's probably more important is we have the information from the housing needs assessment, which indicates that we have need in every housing form. And we know that if you look at all of the housing forms, we're not going to have difficulty with single detached homes. That's probably what's going to get built on this island. And what's important in terms of council is that council express its preference for particular types of homes and particular forms of ownership. So it would be helpful, for example, for developers to hear that council is interested in the creation of multifamily residential, preferably duplexes or townhouses, and as much as possible, non-market forms of housing. If you recall the development potential report that Daniel prepared some months ago that looked at the current housing on Bowen and what could be built, it was already baked in terms of the approved zoning on this island. There were up to something like a 900 odd potential new households coming out of that. If you think of those households in terms of having 2 people, low estimate, that's another 2,000 odd people. If we've got 4,000 at the moment, that gets us to 6,000. The number that gets cited all the time about sort of our capacity on this island is around about 7,000. So in terms of the discretion of this council, we've got about 1,000 people to play with, maybe 400 homes where we can make a decision that makes a difference to the form of the house that's being created and the type of person, the type of household that is being encouraged. So those are my comments on the topic right now. But there are a lot of recommendations in this report, and I'm wondering if it might be useful to let Robin or Daniel run through to the end so we get to the end of all of the recommendations and then start talking about them with a bit more of a bigger picture rather than us all sort of jumping in and offering opinions as we go. So I really would recommend that. Get to the end and then start at the beginning again.
Okay, I'm okay with that. Does anybody object, or does anybody really strongly want to say anything on this particular subject before we move on?
Robin, just before we move on, by the way, I concur with Councillor Nicholson. In terms of these forecasts of what we need, we also have a real live goalpost set. If we look at the Bellringer property, you only have to look at the waiting list to give an indication as to immediate needs and the type of immediate needs: 1 room, 2 room, 3 room, etc. So I think we can pull this together in terms of setting reasonable goals to answer David Hocking's question. So I think we've got enough information with what Councillor Nicholson said, and looking at the Bellringer project, I think we can do this to set ranging from immediate needs to moving out, and I think we can satisfy that demand. The question that Mayor Ander raised. So I think we can come up with something meaningful and decisive enough. And I do agree, by the way, that we should move through this, and maybe rather in the spirit of leaving our questions to the end.
Yeah, okay, so if we see no objections, I'm just gonna jump right in. Oh, Mayor Ander?
Well, it was just Sheila had her hand up there, and I just wondered if it was pertinent or she can wait till later.
I was just looking at the housing needs report, and on page 47, it does have some projections in regards to Bowen Island Municipality household projections by age, cohort, and tenure preference. And it talks about that Bowen Island Municipality can expect a total of 164 new households at an average rate of 11 new households per year. If that helps to answer, provide some information there. And then those projected new households, owner households will make up 135 and renters will make up 29. So we have a percentage there, and that was over a 5-year period.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think once we get into it, that housing needs report will have a lot of information, as will the Birch housing survey that we did a couple of years ago. Okay, so I'm going to jump in, and I'll just really skim over the high level topics of these 8 suggestions, and then we can come back for questions. So number 1 was setting housing targets. Number 2 was recommendations to encourage more secondary suites. I don't think this will be a surprise. Lowering the lot size requirement, possibly looking at relaxing parking requirements, reaching out as a survey to the community to see if there's ways, because we have heard anecdotal feedback that there are some existing buildings out there that are unused, and whether there's some barriers due to building code or zoning or permitting or anything that are stopping them from being legally used as suites. So if there's some way to reach out to community and start those existing buildings that are there, that's really low hanging fruit. Those are really easy ones if we can find a way to more easily convert those to rental stock. Number 3, housing reserve fund. Again, this isn't a big surprise. Actively seek out methods to build the housing reserve fund, which includes the municipal and regional district tax, cash in lieu of housing, affordable housing, which is already in place. And then potentially, if instructed, we could do some research into how other communities are funding this. Number 4, cluster and duplex zoning. So this is a new one, and I believe, I'm not sure if it was included in the agenda. No, it wasn't, but I do have examples from a couple of other communities that have created this new type of zoning. So Maple Ridge, Gibson's, and I think City of Vancouver, but I definitely have the examples from Gibson's and Maple Ridge, that they allow for, this term gentle density, which is kind of a common bit of jargon that really talks about getting higher levels, more density than single family homes into existing neighborhoods. So whether that's allowing, a duplex, say, where you might have allowed a single family home, whether that's kind of having pilot projects. So in an established neighborhood, maybe using one lot as a pilot project, and instead of building one large family home, building, several small ones, or building like a fourplex or something like that. It's some sort of innovative, different way of using the zoning, and it could be used through pilot projects. And we do have examples of those kinds of zonings. And then the other part of that, which you'll see in a couple of these, is just as council has recently done an expression of interest for part of the community lands, this could be something where there's sort of some sort of outreach from council to say, hey, to the private development community, to private landowners, this is something that we're looking for. Is there a way we can work with you and help support you for doing one of these pilot projects? Because this is the kind of housing that we want to see. Number 5, changes to the land use bylaw. So this one's probably possibly kind of more, really more involved and would require quite a bit of discussion. And I know that there's recently just been a whole bunch of changes to land use bylaw. So I'm not sure the appetite for going into again, but I think my preference would be probably not to dig too deep into this one unless it was really seriously something we want to talk, because I feel like we could almost spend a whole lot of time talking about the details of this. And so I don't want to get too lost in the weeds. It's really more of a high level concept of this is how we can use a tool that you have. A tool that you have is the land use bylaw. And there's ways that you can make changes to it that can incentivize people to build the kind of housing that we would like to see. So, so it's really, again, you could get lost in, we're just giving a few examples there, and I don't want people to get too caught up in the details of it. I'm happy to discuss those as examples, but we're simply saying these are examples of how you can use this tool in your toolbox as ways to incentivize the private development community to build housing that we're looking for. So it's things like implementing a floor space ratio or maximum house size, which, for example, has been done on Foxglove Lane and I believe Kate's Hill. And we did have, and I think Allison just shared, there was that pilot project at the top of Kate's Hill that did duplexes that I think was, relatively successful. Certainly, I think in terms of acceptance in the neighborhood and the scale and proportions, all of those kinds of things. So examples of how you can use the land use bylaw is these floor space ratios, maximum house sizes, which we already have examples of on the island. Something that's called two-tier zoning that I'm certainly familiar with in Vancouver. And if we do have more questions, Fritz can certainly talk a bit more about it. But again, very high level. It's the idea that there's often the word, it's used outright zoning, which is essentially what we have now. So you have a lot, you can do, 30% site coverage, 9, meters high and these setbacks. And then you don't need any approval except a building permit. So have at her. But if you want to do these extra things and you want to say, build a rental suite, or you want to do a detached secondary suite, or what we could call rental ready, which is essentially building the house so it's designed to be very quickly and easily converted into a rental suite in the future, then you can get these extra bonuses. So whether that's more floor space, whether that's whatever. So again, these are tools that are available to you. And we're saying these are examples of how you can use that to get these, this in this particular case, more rental units, those kinds of things, or potential ones in the future. And I think this third one's a little bit of a repetitive. Yeah, the whole idea of suite ready. So if you have more questions about that, but I think hopefully suite ready is fairly apparent that it's the idea of designing a space that is used by the household first, but then it's also maybe already plumbed in to have that extra kitchen and the fire ratings are already there. So should somebody in the future or a new owner, it's very simple for them to make it into an actual suite without major renovations. Number 6 is alternative modes of land tenure. So this one, and I should maybe preface, these first ones I feel are very, and I'm happy to discuss this, I feel are really kind of more easily achievable or, relatively within, the purview of council. And I would say these further ones are maybe a little bit more, challenging. There would be a lot more work on the behalf of council. Again, I'm happy to discuss that and be, proven wrong. But if it's sort of in the easier at the top of the list towards the harder at the bottom list is generally, it's not a hard and fast rule, but that's kind of how it went. So alternative modes of land tenure. So the rationale behind this is to encourage alternative types of land tenure to reduce land costs. And we've had a couple of talks recently, and if you haven't watched them and if you're interested, the last 2 housing advisory committees, we've had 2 guest speakers, 2 delegations from developers, and it's been quite enlightening. They take up about the first, 30 to 40 minutes, I think, of our meeting. And one of the things that certainly came out for me that's no surprise, but to have it reinforced was great, is that it's, the land costs. I appreciate construction costs are high and all of those things as well, but it's the land cost, in my opinion, that is often really a challenge to creating these different types of tenure and making it, this is more sort of in the affordable scheme of things that are affordable, I would say even to the average income and below at this point in time. So the idea of this is different modes of land tenure. So inviting, the language we use is invite, support, facilitate private property owners to apply for pilot projects to accommodate some different form of land tenure. So for example, a lot of us are familiar with the sort of trailer park model or a tiny house village, and that's in the form of leasing pads. So one owner owns the property, puts in the servicing in these pads, and then people bring in, either manufactured homes, tiny houses, whatever, there's lots of details to work out, but essentially then they lease that pad for a set amount per or month or per year, and then they own the, the actual structure that's on it, whether it's a manufactured home or a tiny house or a trailer or something like that. So, and there's obviously ways to make those, aesthetically pleasing if that's a concern for people in a certain neighborhood or people on the island. There's different ways of controlling all of those things and taking away. I think a lot of people have sort of an aversion to the word sort of trailer park, and they have visions in their mind of what it's going to look like, but it doesn't have to be like that. It's simply a different mode of land tenure, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a certain, look to it or a certain, it can be just as nice and just as friendly and community based as any other thing. It's just simply a different form of land tenure, making it more affordable. And then the next one on this is an alternative form of land tenure. So this is 6B, is give serious consideration to a community land trust model for some or all of the community owned land. So if there's some of the community owned land that is, clearly earmarked for the housing development or something else, it would be to give consideration to giving the control of that over to a community lands trust. That would be based in the community, have board members who are from the community, and they would be then making those long-term decisions about what would go in there and what would be built. And that's, again, a different form of land tenure, because then they have the potential to control what the cost is, whether it's, leased or sold or any of those things. Number 7, encourage attached multifamily housing forms. So this, we've kind of touched on this already a bit. The rationale is this allows for gentle density in established neighborhoods away from the cove. So I think I talked about this earlier, the whole gentle density, introducing slightly higher density into existing neighborhoods while maintaining the neighborhood character. Again, it's the similar language of how can we, as municipality, reach out to private owners and private developers to support them or facilitate them to do those things. Same again, citing that example of the pilot project at the top of Kate's Hill, and using the expression of interest method. So basically putting the onus on the private community, not on the municipality to develop those, but on the private developers. But how can the council or the municipality support them in doing that and reaching out to them proactively and saying, this is the kind of stuff that we would like to see. And the final one, number 8, would be actually full-on proactive rezoning. So the example most recently in my mind would be, and I'm going to forget it here, the lands where the new rental building is on just below the community center. I'm going to forget which lot and which area that is, but we all know what I'm talking about, the triangle lot. That one was proactively rezoned by council and then sold, and then the housing was built. So I think that was a very, very successful example of something that happened. So that in this case was owned by council and was bare land. The other ways that you can do it, and I mean, the really extreme example that's coming to my head right now is in Vancouver, the Cambie corridor. So they rezoned near the SkyTrain stations for higher density and all of those things. And then when the time comes along that somebody, a developer buys that property to rezone it into something much bigger. And I'm sure we all heard the stories of, little single family houses along in those areas. And all of a sudden their, property values shoot up and all of those things. So I'm not saying it's without challenges, but council can do that. And then when the developer comes in to buy that land to build something bigger, they capture that rise in value in the land in a form of what's called development cost charges or community amenities, all those things. And I think it's done on Bowen when there's rezonings, right? We get parkland, we get a trail, we get all those things. So there are already these sort of established, trade-off's not the right word, but you get what I'm saying. There's already this established thing that, okay, we're giving you a rezoning for higher density, you're going to contribute something to the community. So it's just taking that to sort of another level. So if there were, for example, the easiest example that comes to mind is there's a couple of areas close to the cove that are still zoned for basically single family. If you took those, proactively rezoned them into something of slightly higher density, similar to say maybe the cove or the Foxglove Lane development, something along those lines, that at the time that somebody came for a new probably development permit, I'm guessing, or building permit to build those, that's when you could potentially capture those charges. Anyways, very high level concepts. That's, I don't want to get, again, I think I'll stop talking. So we've still got lots of time to discuss all of those things, but high level, those are the different ideas that we've got. And as I said, very vaguely kind of from what I feel like is sort of easier ones to kind of harder ones for council to be able to tackle. Okay, Councillor Fast has a hand up, so I'm thinking she gets to go first.
Okay, thank you, Robin. And just thank you for the presentation and all the hard work from the committee. It's really good to read this sort of analyzed info, because there's so much info out there, so many ideas. And thank you for filtering it down and making these, forming these recommendations, and you and your group. I'm reassured to hear you mention the official community plan, because then, like Councillor Nicholson said, we need to think about the whole island and the way we can live here sustainably in a community that is what people want in our community plan as expressed in there. Things have changed a lot, I know. We've got a housing crisis and we've got other kinds of crises too. And so yes, things need to change, but we still have, I think we need to still hold the course. Mind you, the OCP does call for diverse housing, that's fine. My question is, and I'm happy to hear you say the recommendation about community land trusts, because I like the idea of community land for community uses through the future. So whether it's just through leasing or a community land trust, but some way to keep the community lands from evolving into private hands and then going off to other things. I've seen cities around the world like Berlin buying back housing at great cost so that they have places for their people to live. Anyway, I won't go into all that except to say a couple of things. I'm glad to see floor area ratio, or you called it floor space ratio, mentioned there in recommendation 5. And we've got a report that's just been referred to us by the Islands Trust, because all kinds of other islands obviously are having these issues. Sort of a discussion paper that might be useful to your committee, I don't know, but it's coming to the municipality soon. And my question is about setting targets for the different kinds of housing. Will we also, or what does the committee think about also setting targets for empty homes, the number of homes that are vacation homes or short-term vacation rentals? Because with COVID and even before COVID, with internet availability and mobility, there's kind of more and more people moving out of urban centers into charismatic exurbs like us, or like Banff, or like other beautiful, more rural places. And it drives up house prices and it even further, and it takes up housing that you might want for the people that actually have lived and built and work in the community. So some places, for example, Southern California, are sort of being hollowed out. And I'm wondering, does your committee think about, are there ways to measure those other parts too? How many houses are not being used for people living in them?
I can quickly answer that. And we did discuss as a committee the idea of the empty homes, especially the empty homes tax that's in BC, and I think short-term rentals have come up, and I think we sort of quashed those fairly quickly, because I think when the empty homes tax came up, and I don't remember all of the details, but Bowen was in or out or all of those different things. I think there was a resounding community feedback, and I think we sort of decided that had been discussed and decided as a community we didn't.
I'm not talking about a tax. I'm talking about measuring.
Oh, okay. So I think the easy answer is the census. Like, I believe that the census data will tell, and I'm seeing nods of yeah. And so I guess we're getting census data soon-ish, in the next 6 or 9 months, right? So like refreshed census data soon. So we have the old 2016 or whatever, but hopefully that new stuff will be very informative if we are seeing those. So I think that's an easy one, Councillor Fast. And
does that measure? I mean, I'm familiar with the census data, but I don't know it in detail enough to know whether it tracks the turnover or the churn of house prices rising, residents leaving for whatever reason, and then new residents coming in. I'm not sure that, is there a way in the census data to track?
I'm going to turn that over to Councillor Nicholson, because I feel like she knows the answer to this one.
Ask the question again, Sue Ellen, just so I'm Certainly.
Well, this relates to the people moving out of urban centers, buying properties in areas with good internet, and house prices rising, and renters having to move away, and generally a changeover of who lives in that community. And do we have a way of having a finger on the pulse of what is happening in that regard through the census, or is it only realtor stats and things like that?
Well, I think it ends up being a combination of data sources that you look to. With the census, you do get data about the churn. Did you live in the same area 5 years ago? Did you move within your area
That's right.
within the last 5 years? So that data is there. What I'm not clear about is how easy it is to correlate that data with housing data. I mean, they're sort of independent. You can look at them separately and probably reach some conclusions.
Well, this is, thank you. That's great. I just wanted to say I like the idea of setting targets for housing, but that's only the growth side of it. And I'm wondering if we can set targets, or at least, set targets for how many diverse households we want to still have on Bowen. Because it's one thing to build housing, it's another thing who actually moves into them, if they move into them. And so that's kind of what I'm wondering. Do we want to set targets for reducing the amount of single family? I'm only seeing the targets for new housing, and I'm recognizing we live on a finite island where sometimes it's wells and septic fields and things that'll be the limitation. But I just wonder if we could also set targets for the other aspects besides only growth. Thank you.
Robin?
Okay, great. Councillor Nicholson was next. Councillor Kale, did you want to directly reply to Councillor Fast? Do you mind, Councillor Nicholson, if it's a...
Okay.
No, sorry, to Councillor Fast's question, and I think it's a very good one. The trouble with census data is by the time you get it, life has moved on. I think we're probably getting some of our best information as to the demographics. I think what Councillor Fast is getting at is it's not just numerical, but it's also socioeconomic grouping. Mm-hmm. And I understand the background question. Very often it's the real estate industries who can tell you and give you the most accurate information of the types of property that are being sold to the various groups of people and even income levels to give you the sort of question that you want. But I would say that in terms of existing properties, as opposed to new properties, existing properties will always be market driven. An existing property, someone will buy it and they have the right to buy it and they will be who they will be. And I think we will have very little influence, and I don't think we should have. The market will dictate that. However, so I think our influence is somewhat constrained to new building. The new building, however, will probably be influenced by who is buying the existing buildings and what issues it creates as a result. So I think the knock-on effect is who is buying the existing buildings? Well, the real estate businesses probably give us the best information. And what is the implication for that for our new builds? I think it's very, very difficult to in any way try to constrain who buys an existing building. And I don't think that's a business a municipality would be in. I just don't think that's something. But I think that I do see, so I appreciate the question. So I think one will have the information on one will be an influencer on the new bills and the types of new bills and the effects on this report. And I can't find another way. I hope, Sue Ellen, that adds a little bit, if anything else.
Sure. I wasn't talking about stopping people. I was talking about having the data and what other tools we might have to manage some of the things like empty homes and short-term vacation rentals and things like that. So never mind. That's good. Thank you. I just wanted to get that idea out, not just growth.
No, and that's okay. And Councillor Fast, just to say, and I can't remember off the top of my head which number it is, but the one where we address, maybe it's in the land use bio chains, where we address existing buildings, because there are existing buildings, you know, suites, basements, outbuildings that are, you know, halfway there or partly there that just simply aren't full legal suites. And so that was one of our ways of addressing some of the existing buildings that has existing infrastructure and not necessarily just new buildings. But I hear your comment. And I think that's also about the idea of some of the gentle density. So taking established neighborhoods where there's probably like maybe an older dilapidated home that really isn't worth much and actually knocking that down and building something new on an existing property. So not just the development. So I appreciate the comment. And we did try to include that in our recommendations. Councillor Nicholson, you've been so patient.
Just to elaborate on some of the other sources, the schools and the daycares are really helpful for getting a sense of the shift in demographics. They're a little bit less clear than they ordinarily would be because of COVID and so many school kids doing homeschooling or IDLC, but ordinarily they would be helpful. The point that Robin just brought up about the use of existing homes or the repurposing of existing homes, that was a point that Rob Purdy really stressed in the first meeting that we had with developers, that we are not making optimal use, and that there may be some changes that could be made to municipal regulations that would enable better use of the building that we already have. And then your other point, Sue Ellen, about Airbnb, we've only had the residential guest accommodation regulations in place for what, a year or so. So the data isn't there yet, but it's, I think, really important because when it does come and when it's solid, because if we're enabling the building of secondary suites, attached or detached, and they're being used for Airbnb, VRBO, whatever, that's not what the objective was in allowing those suites. And then just my final point, and it relates to empty homes. There was discussion early on in the committee, and Robin said we sort of set some of that aside. Empty homes taxing, Bowen has a tradition of a long-term tradition of having second homes, and that amounts to roughly, at the moment of last reliable data, about a quarter of the homes here. It'll be interesting to see if that has changed and whether some of those empty homes are now primary residences. The other point that came up early on is that we are the only municipality in Metro Vancouver that does not have the speculation tax. And if you recall, that decision was made sort of simultaneously with the introduction of the spec tax. So that makes Bowen attractive for certain kinds of buyers. And it's not something that's likely to be a change that's likely to be supported. So just keep that in mind. And that's all I have to say at this point. Thank you.
Robin?
Yep.
Just for clarity here, are we going back to the beginning and just going through these recommendations? Because it would be nice to have some kind of the resolution to these recommendations from council going forward.
Okay, yeah.
This will go out to the mayor's standing committee afterwards. Eh?
Yeah. Could I just jump in? The recommendation here is that the committee of the whole receive the report and recommend that council review the recommendations, identify priorities, and provide direction. That's a really ambitious recommendation. 2 hours of just sort of the rest of council familiarizing itself with work that the Housing Advisory Committee has been doing for more than a year. So personally, I don't see us landing on too many of these recommendations and saying, go forward. I see this meeting as getting an overview so that when we come to our strategic planning session, we can give direction to the Housing Advisory Committee and say, focus on these. And that gives us time to digest rather than making decisions on the fly, which is what we would be doing if we started making decisions here and now. So others are welcome to express their views on that, but that's sort of my hope for this meeting.
Okay, well, that's good, but could we just sort of do them in order rather than just having a general discussion on the whole paper? I think would be more productive. I don't know, Robin, what do you think?
Well, we've got a couple of questions. Why don't we go through those, and then we still have a fair bit of time left in our meeting.
Yeah.
Obviously, if we finish early, everybody will be pleased. But why don't we go through the questions that people have their hands raised, and then maybe once we've kind of addressed those, then maybe towards the latter half of the meeting, we can go through each one, and maybe if there's more specific questions, or if people really clearly, if that's like a hard yes, and like, yes, advisory committee, this is very obvious, everyone's in favor, why don't you start working on that? Or if it's simply a I take Councillor Nicholson's point that it's a lot to digest, and maybe it is better to take to your strategic planning and give us direction. But if there's one that everybody is in agreement today, like this is definitely worth pursuing, Housing Advisory Committee, for example, targets, it kind of seems like everybody's on board with that. Maybe that's something you can set as like, hey, over the next few months, why don't we start doing a little bit of research on that? Why do you, so if there is something like that, that is a really easy yes, that would be great. But if it's not, and the end is like, great, we'll get back to you after strategic planning, I think that's fine as well. So why don't we take the questions, and then I take your point, Councillor or Mayor Ander, we can go through each one and kind of, if there's any specific questions, or if it's on, yay or nay, or if they kind of come on or off the list. Councillor Morris. Yeah.
Sorry, now I've got a froggy throat to boot. So you're talking in here on number 4 about clusters of smaller attached homes. We already support cluster housing in some of our policies, so I'm not sure what the difference is between what you're suggesting and, I mean, if you're talking about smaller homes on smaller lots, like down in Foxglove Lane, then that's sort of, is that what you're meaning by clustering?
Well, it's that concept, yes, but what we're doing is what we're proposing specifically in that one is developing a zoning. So like I say, Maple Ridge, Gibson's have, and I don't know what it would be called, but you know how we have like RR2 and RS1, and we have all those different zonings. So it would be actually the creation of a zone that's called cluster housing, or whatever it's called, and it would be there ready to go. And then people, so it's not starting from scratch every time, because like, for example, the Foxglove Lane one, the other ones, they're all, starting from scratch, and we have to make it up as we go and then figure it out. Whereas if there was this kind of already pre-made zoning that said, okay, here are those, criteria, somebody could have a piece of land and say, I want to change it to that zoning. And then it's a lot more straightforward, right? I'm seeing Councillor Fast. Foxglove Lane is the Snug Cove House development. Sorry, that's the new word for it. Snug Cove House. How they did that development is the road's called Foxglove Lane now. So that was the idea, is to develop based on these other examples, and obviously to the Bowen context would be to create this already like zoning that's already there, that people can very easily say, I want to go to that zoning, and then work within those confines. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm just sort of remind you that I'm sure you're aware, but the Vancouver Charter allows Vancouver to do things that other munis can't do.
Yeah, so, and that's why I've had examples from the city of Maple Ridge and the town of Gibson's.
Yeah, but that was more in your referring. So back in the beginning of February 2020, you guys submitted a report, Secondary Suites Bylaw Review. So this is more, I guess, a question for Daniel. There were suggestions in there about doing different things, I think. Or you were looking at us wanting to change things in the land use bylaw? And have we picked those up in the Love amendments?
No. A few of them were done in the residential guest accommodation change. So like we used to have a prohibition on having a B&B and a secondary suite on the same lot. And so we've removed that prohibition through the residential guest accommodation piece. In terms of the more substantial changes, I had at the time optimistically thought that the sort of the land use bylaw amendment bylaw would be wrapped up before too long, and then I would look at making sort of substantial changes to secondary suite regulations or other regulations.
Okay, because I guess to me, the easy win, if people kind of want to do it and afford to do it, is either, allowing people to build, turning a 1 acre lot into 2 or 3 single family lots, and or allowing more detached secondary suites, but I think the whole question is going to boil down to, it's been interesting in the 20 odd plus years that we've been living here. I've seen a change in people's attitudes to, it's got to be single family large lots, to accepting more small lots on small lots with, larger lot coverage, such as the Foxglove Lane situation. And maybe that's just because their kids are now looking for housing and they've finally realized that that's the only way they're going to be able to afford it. So I guess I'm thinking in the OCP, we could signal that kind of housing is would be looked upon favorably. And I don't know that we've actually signaled small lots with larger lot coverage as a Foxglove Lane style. Some pocket zonings in some of the outer areas as to being, I think there's going to be some OCP changes in there. So anyhow, that was, and I can't read my handwriting to ask my other questions. So I'll try and translate my handwriting and come back on that one.
Okay, Councillor Hocking.
Thanks, Robin. So my comment here is sort of a process one from a couple of the comments. So I was thinking, okay, what do we do with all this? And my idea was kind of the same as what Councillor Nicholson said, what Maureen said, is that, okay, this needs to go to a strategic planning session for council to figure out, okay, what to do in our, what work should we embark on? But the tricky part of that is a limitation is staff time. Staff is busy, Daniel's busy particularly. And so I think it's worthwhile to go through the, as Gary said, okay, let's zip through all 8. I mean, my general sense is I agree with all of them at a high level, but what from a staff perspective, what needs to be done to do them? One of the things we've been trying to do in some of our committees is do some of the work ourselves. So we make recommendations and then come up with an answer to that recommendation. For example, the Environment Committee and Climate Action Committee is looking at a pesticide bylaw where they've actually developed a draft bylaw, and that will be presented to council. So one of the questions I think that would be worth looking at is, as we go through these, what could the Housing Committee do to make it easier for staff? For instance, in number 1, set housing targets. Well, you could probably do that. You could probably develop draft housing targets. And so instead of saying, hey, Daniel, how long will it take you to do this? You could come up with some ideas and then we can look at them, look at the rationale and so on. So I think as we zip through the 8, it would be good to chat a little bit about how much work would that be for staff and what could the Housing Committee do to help us along? So those are my comments on how we just move forward. That's all. Thanks.
Yep, and agreed. And definitely some of our intention is to help with as many of these as possible as the committee. And again, that gives us that direction and we can, funnel it into doing research and drafting things. So for sure. Councillor, I think Councillor Fast, your hand's up again. And then I think Fritz DeVries also wanted to speak. So we'll go to Councillor.
Sure, this will be brief. Thank you. I'm just looking here, I think it was, well, anyway, I'm wondering we've got a couple of successful nonprofit housing, well, I don't know if they're nonprofit. Anyway, we've got a seniors co-op and we've got a co-housing project on Bowen already. And there could be more, and I read about different kinds of things like Baugruppen and all kinds of European different models. Where would they fit into your recommendations. I just don't see anything about co-ops or co-housing and other styles. Is that the alternative one?
I think,
Number
yeah,
6?
I think actually to your point, that is an oversight of ours. So in alternative forms of land tenure, I think co-op could be definitely included in that list. And then that would simply be a matter of also finding land for it. So that might fall under the community lands trust idea or something like that. So and I think we could definitely use more co-op housing. And so that would be an interesting one to see where that might fit. But of course, developing that is a real challenge. If it's truly sort of non-market housing and co-op housing, then finding land for it and all of that kind of stuff and getting a group together to build it. And co-housing, yeah, it could be on the list, but I'm not sure how much more of a desire there is for it. And it is also, and you could listen to the talk we recently had with Mark Shea from Tomo Housing. You know, co-housing is extremely difficult and time consuming to develop.
Yes.
So again, not to say we shouldn't pursue it necessarily or put it on our list of desired housing types. I think that's really valid, but
Okay,
yeah, whether
thank you.
yeah.
It's just I only saw the trailer park model and tiny house there,
Yeah.
so I made me wonder whether those others were excluded on purpose. Thank you.
Nope, that's a great point. Thank you. Fritz, go ahead.
Yeah, I found it interesting what Sue Ellen said, because she said to look more consciously, you know, set a target for reducing the percentage of single-family homes. And I've never heard somebody say it coming from that direction. But what I like about it, it would justify, for instance, saying, well, yeah, the percentage of single-family homes is too large in most single-family areas, I guess, right? And there is an established need for other forms of housing, and that would really justify, you know, allowing pilot projects that maintain neighborhood character to go forward in specific neighborhoods. So it was more like a comment. I like the way it was presented by Sue Ellen Fast as looking at a neighborhood and saying the percentage of single family is just too high. And for instance, allowing a duplex to be built, which allows two parties or two families to purchase one lot and put on a duplex that fits the neighborhood character. I think that would be a really easy thing for council to allow. It is also incremental. It doesn't go very fast. Give you an example, the city of Vancouver has done it as blanket zoning. And our office has done now 2 projects that respond to that. Both of them fit the neighborhood character. Both of them give more housing for more people, and it makes it less expensive because people share equity.
Thanks, Fritz. Yeah, that's great. And
people
it's
share
good.
what? People share
Share the
Yeah.
equity. Right?
equity. Thank you.
You have
And I
2
think-
buyers instead of 1.
Yeah, and I think
Two
actually a
owners.
good example of that here on Bowen is the recently completed fourplex on Foxglove Lane. So that was because the zoning allowed for it. So a party of four parties bought 2 lots, amalgamated them, and built a 4-unit strata development. So instead of 2 families buying a lot each, we got 4 families buying 2 lots. So that immediately cut their land price in half. And so then they were able to build. So yeah, so that there's definitely examples of that happening. More. Fritz, did you have any more to say? Your hand's still up, or are you?
Oh, I'm sorry, I have to
your
remove that.
Thoughts are complete. No, that's okay. And then Councillor Morris is next, and then maybe if that's it, then we'll start running through each one, like Mayor Ander had suggested, and then we can kind of talk about each one. Councillor Morris.
Fritz's comment raised a question in my mind, a couple of questions. In North Van and West Van, they're doing, and I know in some of the areas in Vancouver, they're doing infill. So the laneway housing. And so you haven't really referred to that. Is that covered? That's picked up by our detached secondary suites zoning?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it is. Maybe I'll ask Daniel to sort of answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, generally I look at our detached secondary suites as like the equivalent of laneway housing if we had lanes.
Okay.
Yeah, but
So
but it implies there's a huge difference, because in one case it is a secondary suite. Actually, you need one person that has more equity, more capital, to decide that they want a secondary suite. But what's the key about duplexes is that it allows what Robin just said. It allows more people to share and build up their own equity. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you have a rich owner and a renter, but you have two people that do something together, and both of them become owners, and it fits well in a single family neighborhood.
So that just bringing me back to the second part of my question then. The Laneway housing that's being built in West Van, North Van, and Vancouver and so forth is all on one lot and is being built by the owner of the
Yes.
lot.
Yes.
Okay, so, you know, I guess I'm thinking, and I know when we did detached secondary suites, there was a lot of concern that people would then want to subdivide the lot and then have two lots with two houses. So how's it, you know, I guess I'm thinking out loud here, but to me, having a detached secondary suite, so two houses on one lot and a duplex being two houses on one lot really isn't any different. So why couldn't we have two legal forms of title? And, you know, is there some way to legally create a second form of title so that the person who wants the smaller house but can't afford the underlying land could lease the land off the existing owner and then build the house? Or, you know, is there some way to create that?
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about tackling a lease. I mean, certainly if you have how duplexes are built traditionally on one piece of land is they're stratified, right? So there's a single piece of land,
And
you
they've
build a
got
building and there's
common
strata.
wall.
And they have a common wall and they have common property that they share. And that's a really easy legal way to make that happen. So that's well established. But I hadn't thought about it. And it's interesting about somebody leasing a chunk of someone's land and then building a building on it. I mean, we're obviously talking about it at a municipal level with the Birch project and potentially other projects. It's an interesting thought. And again, sometimes I come back to, not that I want to shut it down, but I come back to, is that within the purview of the municipality? Is that within their control? Like, is this something you as council and the municipality can actually do? Or is it, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure the answer to that one. I think that's a really interesting question. Daniel, you look like you might have something.
Oh, I mean, I was gonna say in general, a lease that's like a land lease that's more than 3 years in term is considered a subdivision.
Hmm.
So we
Right,
come back
so you would
the
have
same
to
question.
subdivide, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the other would just be a matter of being more entertaining to somebody that's got a 2-acre lot, dividing it into 2 1-acre lots rather than, and that means going back to Daniel's math. And
Yeah, and that's more of a traditional rezoning, really. That's not, and I think that what we've kind of avoided, and Councillor Nicholson kind of mentioned this, is like we feel like single family homes are taking care of themselves at this stage. You know, and we have different ones coming up, especially, you know, Grafton Lakes being the most recent large rezoning. They have smaller lots, smaller houses planned and all of that stuff. So our focus was really on what are these different diverse ones, attached forms, duplexes, smaller, on shared common property, those kinds of things. So that's really where our focus and our suggestions were.
because I guess just, you know, from a reality perspective, I think people would prefer to have their own single family home if they could afford it. And these other forms of housing are being forced by the marketplace because they're cheaper.
I respectfully disagree. I think that there's lots of people who actually enjoy living in strata buildings. I have to say, when I am faced with maintenance on my own property, I strongly wish I was still in a strata property, because I'm very good at going to strata meetings and telling property managers who to hire and what bills to pay. I am not so good at cleaning out my gutters and maintaining my yard. So there are people out there who actually enjoy, you know, the hands-off-ish of being in a strata property. And also, to the point of thinking about co-housing, it does develop community. So think of one of the things like we're sorely lacking is like a sort of family-oriented townhouse complex. I didn't live in one of these, but I had family who did when we were growing up, and going to their home in this townhouse complex that had kids everywhere was so much fun, because there were kids out in the driveways playing ball hockey. They actually had a common pool, not that I'm saying that here, but like you went and there were just kids everywhere, and it was a fun time. So we always wanted to go visit our cousins. So it's not just about, you know, the form of land tenure, people wanting certain things. I think that you build community if it's oriented in those certain ways. I know for the Birch project, we're certainly hoping to build community for those people living near the Cove. So I think there's all different types of people. And I think that might have been true in the past for Bowen, certainly, because that was the character of the island. It was larger lots, single family homes, and people probably came here for that. But I think that the demographics are changing and people's expectations changing. And I don't deny that's influenced by market forces and finances and people's ability to buy, for sure. But I think there are people who like living in those shared communities and co-op housing, co-housing strata properties and the community they can build and everything. So I wouldn't completely say that it's financial and economic driven. There are other benefits to those kinds of housing.
Well, we
Yeah.
can have that debate over coffee because there's lots of disadvantages to being in a strata.
Sure. There's lots of disadvantages to being in a single family home too. So yeah, happy to do it. We should go for coffee sometime, Councillor Morse. Councillor Hawking.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I just really agree with what you just said, Robin. I think I personally would be on your side in the idea of my own experience in the past with shared responsibilities like that. It's pretty great, and lots of kids, lots of fun. I agree. Thanks.
Okay, so seeing no more hands, why don't we run through each of the ones and just see if there's any more specific questions as a refresher, because I know there was 8 and there might be some we didn't touch on, and then I'll sort of leave it to everybody to chat and counsel and see if you want to give us any direction or if it's simply taken as information. So housing targets, I feel like we did talk about that one quite a bit, so I don't know if there's any other comments on that one. The next one was encouraging more secondary suites. Again, I feel like that one's probably not, super revolutionary. So hopefully there's no more thoughts on that one. Housing Reserve Fund, we haven't touched on that one, but again, I feel like that's also one that would be a fairly easy one for the potentially for the community to help out with. Like that's just some research, potentially reaching out to different communities, seeing how things are done. So that's just kind of some research and maybe a little report we could do. That might be an easy one for the committee to help with. The cluster and duplex zoning, again, I've already found a couple of examples. That's something the committee could certainly work on, finding other examples. If it's appropriate, we could even attempt to help draft a bylaw just to help staff out, just kind of, outline something with what we suggest. So I think that's one. Is there any, we didn't talk too much about, we touched on it, but I didn't talk too much, but I'm not seeing any hands or anything. Okay. The next one is changes to the land use bylaw. Again, I don't think we touched on this one too much. So it's just the idea of using those tools in your toolbox as to, is there ways to use the land use bylaw to introduce these different tools, whether it's a floor space ratio or floor area ratio, maximum house size, 2-tiered zoning, all of these different tools. And we can look for examples of those and make some recommendations so that, and I think that there is still a land use bylaw change coming, another one. So maybe that's sort of, we work concurrently and we as a committee could actually help do some of that research to give to staff. So as when they're proposing some changes, some of that could inform it. So I see that one. Oh, Councillor Fast, I'm seeing your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is the area, I think, where the discussion of the idea of density and what is density, this kind of thing is coming up in various islands. And I know it's been a big discussion on Bowen in the past. And maybe this, what you're calling FSR and what I think of as floor area ratio.
They're interchangeable. They mean the same thing. They're just
okay,
different terms used in different places. Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm just thinking in terms of how to go forward, maybe council would choose to refer the Islands Trust discussion paper, which is kind of on its way to being a model bylaw, to your committee. Might be one way forward in terms of tackling this big topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be great. I appreciate having that referred to us and seeing what they're doing, because I think it's really relevant. If they're already doing a bunch of work in the island context, I think that's really helpful. Yeah. Councillor Nicholson?
I'm just reminded of our island plan for this year and the work that was assigned to this committee. The first point was to expand our affordable housing policy to a comprehensive housing policy based on the 2020 Housing Needs Assessment that includes specific targets for housing types. So in some respects, we as a council have already provided this direction. We did not say that it rested solely with the Housing Advisory Committee. The Mayor's Standing Committee on Community Lands was also concerned. So all of these recommendations, I think, can be considered for potential inclusion, in a comprehensive housing policy that's not just focused on the affordable housing angle. So just a reminder of what we've already done.
That's great. Thanks, Councillor Nicholson. Is there anything, Councillor Fast, your hand's still up. I'm not sure if that's because you have something to say. Nope, just okay. All right. So I'll keep going here. Number 6, alternative modes of land tenure. And thank you, Councillor Fast, for bringing that up, that we should include for consideration co-housing, co-op models, those kinds of things. So exploring those different ones. And again, I feel like maybe this is something the committee could certainly help. Doing some research, maybe looking at other models of community land trust and what that looks like, what steps would be to do that. You know, that could be its own report, what kind of would need to happen to actually create one. So I think that could be an interesting one for the committee to potentially work on. Number 7, encourage attached multifamily housing forms. Yeah, this one, it's, yeah. Is there any further discussion on that one? I feel like we've talked about that one a fair bit. And number 8 is the proactive rezoning. So again, that one that feels, yeah, I mean, that's certainly something we as a committee could help with, and it might, and maybe that's in, well, the same partnership with the community on community lands, but probably not, because it doesn't involve the community lands necessarily, but maybe it could. If there's any, I mean, already that's happening, that some of the community lands are have been, you know, like lot 1 has kind of been already sort of pre-zoned to a certain extent. So I'm not sure, but anyways, that could be worth investigating. And certainly I think the committee could help looking, if it's appropriate, looking at different areas. In my mind, it's more around the Cove. I don't know that we'd have to discuss if it went further than that, but I think it's an easier ask to look around the Cove and just identify areas that might be, you know, good candidates for sort of like upzoning, if we want to kind of call it that proactively. Councillor Fast.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to get the discussion rolling. I was struck by the point you made in your introduction, Robin, about perhaps reducing parking requirements. And it seems to me that, especially in the Cove area, and perhaps in this, maybe this is number 8 here is the place to talk about it, because in the Cove area, we've got transit nowadays. We're getting a multi-use pathway underway. And so we've got more electric bicycles on the island every week, and other kinds of forms of alternative transportation. People are cycling and walking, and all kinds of things. And I'm wondering where and when council might discuss the idea of reducing parking minimums, because we have done that occasionally for the distillery, I believe, and replaced one of those with a bike rack, which I haven't seen yet. Anyway, as a bike rider. And I'm wondering if, I can't remember what we did there. And I don't mean to point any fingers. I'm just saying we've done it before. As a one-off, should we start thinking about it as a bigger deal? Because I remember back through time, it's a big issue for property owners looking at their options, and it's a lot of space for parking vehicles that may not be as necessary nowadays as they were before, and especially in this time of climate change and with our new active living guidelines and things like that. What do you think?
I might throw that to Daniel. I'm wondering, because my instinct is we have a parking bylaw, right? Like a bylaw within, I think, the land use bylaw. Anyways, I'll throw that to Daniel. Yeah.
I mean, I think if it's more generally looking at parking standards, that's probably, you know, like a council direction for either staff or, you know, some combination of the APC and BIMTAC, I guess, could put together recommendations and look at, you know, what the current standards are And then even it's looking at, okay, what's the actual reality in Snug Cove, and what do the businesses there currently have? Yeah.
Oops, I didn't mean to focus on the current businesses as much as I may have seemed to. I'm more interested in the housing, in homes, and I'm thinking about the properties that are within the Snug Cove plan that might be changing in the village zone and in the village periphery, whether we might want to think about, do we really need, or would it help us meet these diverse housing goals if we were to look again at parking for residences? Anyway, I'll just leave that there. Maybe we can talk about it in our strategic plan then. Thank you.
Yeah, I do think it's worth discussing, and Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think parking is in the land use bylaw. It's like a section of that. So that could be under our section where we said land use bylaw revisions. And there are some things, like I'm just thinking, back years and years ago when I worked on projects for that met the LEED standard, there was certain criteria about, being within 400 meters of a transit line, that, all of those things, or so there could be a revision that included certain things. If you're, within this distance of transit or ferry or whatever it is, that you can automatically get a relaxation, or again, that's another tool that you could use in the two-tiered zoning potentially to say, if you do this extra thing and you're within these things, you can reduce a parking space. So that's one of these tools that you could definitely use. Councillor Fast, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you. And I that's great. I was just confirming my thoughts about that, or getting your take on that. I'd heard you mention it at the beginning, but I hadn't seen it in this report, in these recommendations. So I just thought I would mention that it would be helpful to have something in writing from this committee if you think that would be a helpful thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mayor Ander.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sort of go over the different points I had on the different recommendations. On the first one there, I guess, all the talk about doing the studies and stuff, are you thinking that the Housing Advisory Committee will take this on? Because it could be a colossal amount of work.
I think we could certainly help. I mean, I think it's, we'd have to look into it more, and it really depends. I appreciate it could be a big amount of work, but we could simply, do a preliminary review and see what we come up with, like take it in steps, right? Take it in sort of manageable chunks, do a preliminary review of the existing data that's available, see what we come up with, and then kind of bring it back and then see, okay, do we actually need to dive deeper? Do we need more information? Those kinds of things. So I would hope we could kind of take it in some, incremental steps and check in along the way.
Yeah, and I guess with the community land trust, if we talk about a community land trust, we're actually talking about a pretty much a housing authority there, and
they're quite different.
Community land trust, sorry?
They're quite different. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess and no, but there was talk that community land trust would designate all the properties and that sort of thing, which is what the mayor's standing committee. That was our mandate in the mayor's standing committee. We got held up because of different issues in the Cove with sewer and that sort of thing. But there is, we have obviously zoned a whole bunch of the land. This administration and the previous administration, and and we've left a lot of land for future use. I don't think it's important that we take all the community lands and designate them at this point in time. So that would be interesting to see if that's what should be done. Not all of our community lands necessarily want to go into housing. Is what I'm saying.
No, and I think our suggestion certainly wasn't all of the community lands. It was simply if there was some that was, identified that was appropriate. But Councillor Nicholson, I think you wanted to.
Yeah, and I don't want to gloss over the point of disagreement there. I'd like to hear what the differences are between a housing authority and a community lands trust, because we've conflated them in discussion before, and they are different. And I'd like everybody to be on the same page as to what the differences are. So Robin, could you expand on that, please?
I'll give what I think is my definition, and if anybody, Daniel, or if anybody else wants to jump in with what they also know. So off the top of my head, so my knowledge of a housing authority is that it's this arm's length organization, basically funded by the municipality, but separate from it and managed separately. They are proactively developing housing. So they are taking land that's made available to them. They are acting as a developer. They are actively seeking funding. They are managing it. They are doing all those things. So they are developers and property managers, literally actively creating housing to suit the community needs. So the best example we all know of is the Whistler Housing Authority. That's the most obvious one. And they're proactively, taking land that they've been allocated, taking funds that are available to them, because, Whistler is unique and they have lots more funds available to them. They are proactively building housing. I think they're upwards towards 2,000 units at this stage after 20 years of work. So, and they are property managers, developers, all of those things. So they're a very, very active thing. In my mind, what I understand to be a community land trust, and there's probably different models, so I don't think there's, one right or wrong way, but a community land trust is they're more stewards of the land. So they, and I don't know the legal matter, whether they own it or how that works. So I'm not clear on, but they're stewards of land. So if we took a parcel of land and it was decided that would go into the community lands trust, it's managed by them, which I believe is a board of likely elected board from community members. And they are stewards of that land and they make decisions as to how that land is used. I don't believe they're often developers in themselves. They simply make the land available to others. So whether they might make a decision to sell some of it to fund other things, they might make a decision to allow a nonprofit to build. Maybe they lease it out to a private developer. I'm not sure. I think they have the option to do all sorts of different things, but their main thing being that they are community-based. Board of people that look after this land, and they do it all based for the community, for what they feel is the best in the community, the best use of that land for the community. I don't know if anybody has anything to add in terms of what they understand community land trust to be. That's a bit of a vague description. Yeah, Councillor Fast.
I believe they can also, in terms of how the land is used, they can also, for example, designate some of it for nature or some of it for park and trails and those kinds of things. So it's not exclusively housing.
That's a great point. Yeah. Sorry, you know me. My lens is almost always on housing, and which is appropriate in today's circumstances with the hat I'm wearing. And I guess I do see how the Mayor's Standing Committee is in some ways serving that function, but I think the difference maybe being that the board that's elected to do this, their only mandate is to steward that land. Whereas obviously the Mayor's Standing Committee and, elected officials, you're doing a whole multitude of wonderful things to manage our island, whereas they're just looking after this land and the needs of that land and the needs of the community and how they can best use that land. And that's really their only mandate and mission. So it's very simple, it's very focused, and they are stewards of that land. Yeah. So I think that's, in my mind, very, very distinct difference between a housing authority and a community land trust. Community land trusts are given land, almost like I guess there's some conservation organizations, right, that are more of that, preservation of land. It's a similar thing. They're given this land as stewards to preserve, develop, do whatever they need that's in the best interest of the community and the use of that land. Whereas a housing authority is, in my mind, they are simply a non-market, let's call them developer. Like they are actively developing, funding, property managing, creating all of those things. They're essentially a developer, but they're non-market. They're under the guise of the municipality creating community needed housing. But it's a really different kettle of fish from the Community Lands Trust in my mind.
Yeah, one's in the conservation, the other one's in the housing, and I don't.
Well,
I
would argue
mix up really well.
The Community Lands Trust isn't just conservation. It's more that they are, again, they're just stewards of it. They decide what they feel is best, and then they might have it developed. It might be housing, it might be developed in other ways, or it might be conserved, like Councillor Fast said, into parks and trails. But their focus is that the function of that land. And how they
a mixture, yeah,
exactly.
Two different ways of looking at the same issue, I guess. Okay, so we're just going to move on. Detached suites, we should have reviewed it. Council should have reviewed that. I think there was a clause in there. We're going to take a look at it after a year. I think those the building or the lot size requirement has to be probably cut in half. That would be my recommendation there, and see what happens. Move on to I don't know, just an overall thing, you know, and I've been running into this lately, and everybody is under the impression that developers are just can't wait to get onto Bowen Island to build some low-cost housing. Unfortunately, with the cost of building and everything on Bowen, it's not that easy to get people to come over here and build stuff. So we have to find a way to incentivize. And you also talked about all the empty buildings around. I don't think we can force people to rent their houses. I know we can't do that. We can incentivize somehow. And I think that's something that we should be looking at. I like the idea of if you're building, you know, just raising the FSR just a little bit if they're going to put in a suite or something like that. I mean, we could also say that they have to be suite ready, and that's something we could do through the building codes. But we have to look at a different way to incentivize people. Same thing with pre-built houses. I mean, that's one way to get affordable housing on Bowen Island, but we need land to do that. I mean, there's some land in Lot 2 at the bottom there that we could get into, but by the time we got it all going and got the roads in there and all the sewers and the sewer and water, it's going to be extremely expensive. Where if we could put it out to the population and say, hey, you know, if you've got a 10-acre piece of property that's relatively flat and you're willing to put some prefab houses on there, or a trailer park. I mean, I don't have a problem with a trailer park. Then we should be incentivizing that. And I think that's one thing that we really have to look at as the council is how can we make that work for people to, you know, to help us out here, because we can't do it all. There's no question about it. Anyway, those would just be my comments. And, you know, we got a long way to go on this, and we'll see where it lands. But you've done a great job so far. Thank you, Housing Advisory Committee and Robin.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to just definitely, Fritz, I'll get to you in a sec, just definitely acknowledge the work of the whole committee. And we've had a few members come and go, but everybody's really strongly sorry, I'm losing my words here. They've all have contributed. That's the word I'm looking for, to everything that we've done. And Fritz, especially with lots of the land use things. And yeah, I think it's been a really good working group so far. Fritz, go ahead.
Yeah, this is maybe a bit more in general, but what I definitely find is that as a community, we should look more at a sustainable way of living island-wide. If you look at the OCP, it's still, and the way people think about Bowen, it's still like everything is single family and everything else has to happen right in the cove or close to the cove. And what we run into is that that's actually the most difficult area to get anything done, because we don't have sewers and all that. And then so if you also think about what Sue Ellen said about the parking and what I heard about the internet and people looking to different ways of living, in my mind, the OCP, the way it sits now, is really in our way. But the idea that people don't want, that everybody who wants to live in a multifamily development wants to live in the Cove, I don't think that is correct. I think that in every neighborhood there is potential for different ways of living that actually cater to the neighborhood. Like what you find now, and the city of Vancouver is maybe a good example, is that housing is built in or near existing neighborhoods, so people can actually stay in their neighborhood. A lot of those units are bought by people that want to stay in the neighborhood. So like my kind of feeling is that we still look at Bowen far too much as a commuter place where people go on and off the island, and the rural lands need to be cannot be touched. If you look at the OCP, it actually says that density needs to be transferred to the Cove if you want to have anything that is more dense than a single family home. But I kind of think that if you look at the rural area and you have a group of people that just love to live there, and it's a form of housing that uses hardly any land, and there would be less parking, what's the problem? You know what I mean? Like that's where what people actually like about Bowen is living in a more rural, more secluded areas. And Belterra is actually a good example. This came up a number of times with the Advisory Housing Committee, is that So if you allow septic even phased, like, something can go ahead because there's septic, you can put in a septic field. The irony is that in the rest of the island, it's actually really quite easy. The only place where it's more difficult is in the cove, right? So then what we, for instance, said for parcel 1 or 2, if like Belterra, which is actually a really good example, that you can argue they're there because they could put in septic, and one day that septic can be taken out, and if there's a sewer, that can be connected to it. So the idea that septic can be used incrementally, but also more that we look at how do people want to live on the island in a sustainable way. I find this the existing concept that sits in the OCP, but I think a lot of people unconsciously think that's the way it should always be, is just wrong. Maybe we can look for opportunities in existing neighborhoods or in larger rural areas that are in between, where there's potential, where people can live in a more modest, sustainable way, and not needing large single-family lots.
I think that's a great point, Fritz, and certainly we address it to a certain extent with the whole duplex and cluster zoning, and then maybe that's something we address in the housing targets, that maybe if we can dig deeper, if we take it in these incremental steps and we dig deeper, maybe they become, neighborhood specific, or at least, parts of the island specific, or just simply addressed outside the cove, that there should be certain targets for, gentle density in the different areas. So maybe that's something we can consider.
Yeah, if you ask people, would you like to stay in your neighborhood?
Mm-hmm.
And live in a different form of housing? Or would you rather go off island, or would you rather live in the cove? And in the cove, it's really difficult to do that. But in a local neighborhood, it's actually rather easy to do. I think a lot of people will say we love to stay in our neighborhood.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, thank you, Councillor Morris.
I guess I'm totally agreeing with everything that Fritz was saying. There's, I don't think everybody here on the island is looking for smaller lots, wants to move to the cove. And the other thing I guess I wanted to say was the cluster housing, having found the link and looked at the 2 examples. Small lots enabling houses with, cul-de-sacs, or the fact that you've got a smaller lot and it's single family is not bad. And small lots on a street with single family, you meet your neighbors and you create neighborhood character, because every time you're out in your yard or you're out in your driveway or whatever, you meet your neighbors and you see your neighbors. So I wouldn't want to say that you can't have small lots with houses on them and not create neighborhood feel.
Yeah, agreed. I don't think, any of us want to stop that necessarily. Yeah, and I think a lot of this isn't necessarily about, banning things or stopping things. It's more about incentivizing what we see that the community needs. Yeah. Sheila, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just want to share something on that topic of providing incentives for development, as Mayor Anderhood had asked. So under section 226 of the community charter, we can provide revitalization tax exemptions, and that would just exempt the municipal taxes for up to 10 years. And part of that is social revitalization, which the definition of that is to encourage affordable housing, to increase the supply of affordable housing. A council could provide exemptions to commercial buildings that convert their upper floors to affordable housing rental units, or encourage the construction and preservation of affordable rental housing. A council could exemptions to developers who enter into housing agreements under the community charter and to provide or preserve such housing. So, and that could be customized in order to attract the type of housing density or development that you want. So that's used with major industry, light industry, and there's a number of, for economic revitalization and environmental revitalization also. So that's a very strong form of incentive that that staff can put together working with council and the community.
That's
fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Really good.
And sorry, Sheila, that's from property tax. That's the exemption for up to 10 years?
Yes, for municipal
Municipal
taxes
property
only,
taxes.
not
Yeah.
parcel taxes or any of the other government levels of government taxing. So this is
Okay.
how, this is a really strong tool, you know, for
Incentivizing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. For
Yeah.
a long period of time too.
Yeah, that's great.
I
Councillor
think
Morris, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I just want to add, the Finance Advisory Committee looked at that revitalization tax incentive a number of years ago and did some research and number crunching, and it wasn't a big enough dollar incentive to defray the building costs of doing things and to really help for the hassle it was going to be to do it.
I wonder if that will have changed now that the market values have skyrocketed.
Yeah, it may have.
And the degree of demand.
Yeah, and I'd like to think any incentive is better than nothing. Like, for example, I've just applied, the government at both provincial and federal level has some grants out for upgrading your windows and insulation and stuff. It's not going to pay for it, but it's giving me an incentive to do it. I might still have to pay $1,000 for my window, but I'm going to get $200 back or whatever it is. So that's an incentive enough for me to kind of push forward with something I might have put off for another few years, right? So even though it's not a direct cost to cost trade-off, it's a little thing, right? Like, it's like, oh, I can get a little bit of money back. Oh, sure. Like, maybe I was thinking about doing it anyways, and that pushes me over, or, you know, anything. We all like a coupon, right? We all like a little bit off. It doesn't have to be totally for free. So yeah. Sheila, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was really helpful. That's great. Councillor Nicholson.
Thanks, Robin. I'm wondering if, for the purposes of the minutes, we could systematically go through each point and indicate whether we're giving direction to proceed, whether we're giving direction to explore, or whether there's a flat no in response, because I'm on the committee and I'm not quite sure what my takeaways are going to be from all of this unless we sort of do that. And
I think that's, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I'd be happy to just start that. And
I think that'd be great. Maybe you could lead it. I think it'd be nice if it's a hard yes, a hard no, or if it's a let's take it under advisement and talk about it strategic planning. I think any of those are very reasonable, because some of it might, this needs more discussion. You know, let's take it separately. Some of it might be a really easy yes, like, hey, committee, start working on this. And if there's some that are just hard no's, we're not even interested in going there, if that's, yeah, of any use. But yeah, if you want to, Councillor Nicholson, if you want to do that. I saw Councillor Morris put her hand up. Is that, do you want to?
It's a process question related to that. There's 8 steps here, and I guess my question is, you can't do them all at once, and we haven't got staff time to do much of any of them, and budget to hire people. So do we need to try and prioritize which ones are the most important to do first as we're going through this discussion?
I think we probably do, but maybe the first swoop is just to get that, you know, general picture. So if you'll bear with me, and I also have a process question. Who's voting on this? Is it just council?
I think it's just council. Yeah, really, we're going to take your direction. So unless, and I would say maybe if you would need to ask Daniel about staff capacity, that would be the only thing. I think I've kind of covered what the committee could contribute, hopefully. And if you have a question, but I'll mute myself and you go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is, do we set do you want the Housing Advisory Committee to set housing targets? Yes. Question for council.
I like the idea of targets, but I don't like the use of the word quantify. Quantify to me means a precise number. Target is more of a general range.
Okay, so let's pull back and we'll say targets. It looks like council is in support of setting targets. Yes.
You don't set a plan, you don't have anything to work towards.
Exactly. Okay, and then with the second recommendation to encourage more secondary suites, I'd like feedback specifically on whether we want to consider reducing the lot size.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
David? Yes. Sue Ellen? Reducing the lot size for secondary suites.
And if I may jump in just to clarify, I don't know if it will help at all, is it still takes into account all the other needs, setbacks, height, floor, whatever other restrictions are on. So you're not exempting any of that. They still have to provide water and sewer and all of those kinds of things. So what we're suggesting doesn't change any of those other parameters. It's simply if they can fit it on, they can build it.
The other thing I would add to it is obviously, council's decision today doesn't change it. It's like the Housing Advisory Committee and probably staff do a report to get direction to start bylaw changes.
So Sue Ellen, how about I record this as a yes with some hesitation?
Yeah. Okay. It's just, I want them to work, but I think we need to manage where they are right now. They're kind of, they can be almost anywhere, and I'm not sure that that's the right way. So qualified, yes.
Okay. All right. The Housing Reserve Fund, do we, as council, want to direct the Housing Committee to look into ways to build the Housing Reserve Fund? Is that a job for the Housing Committee?
If
Are
it's
there other
feasible.
ways to build it other than what we're doing if we look at the terms of the reserve fund that we've set up?
That's the question, yeah.
Is there any cash? Is there any money in the reserve fund right now?
No.
Oh, we need to. We have maybe not been as diligent as we could have been on collecting the cash in lieu when it's been a subdivision of more than 3.
I don't think we've ever used that option.
I know we offered it as a suggestion a couple of times, but they built the housing instead, but maybe that's just something where staff needs to be a bit more diligent in collecting it, or we need to amend the policy to make it very clear that if you're doing more than 3 lots in a subdivision, you're either provide the money or you build the unit.
Yeah, so I wonder if I could record this as to further explore with the support of our new CFO.
It's not other initiatives. It's just make sure we're doing the ones we've already mandated is what I'm saying.
I think we are.
Not if there's no cash in there, we're not.
Well, I'm surprised there's no cash. I thought there was a
Can I
couple.
ask Daniel, maybe you can answer this best, or Sheila. Where are we at with the MRDT? I don't think that's in place yet. Is that right? So the Airbnbs aren't. Yeah.
No. We don't have agreement on the MRDT yet.
It hasn't been restarted after it was stalled, is my understanding.
Because of COVID, that kind of thing.
No.
So initially the accommodation providers on Bowen, we didn't receive the required level of support for it. And so we placed it on pause at that point and haven't restarted it, in part because of COVID. It was sort of a hard time to then go after accommodation providers and say, no, nobody can stay and you have no money, but would you like us to tax you?
Thank you.
It is under discussion though, in regards to the new economic development plan, that it is one of the initiatives.
And we also have meetings with Tourism Bowen now that they have a chair, and we might be able to move forward with them on this, but it will take some discussion.
So moving on. Sorry, Sue Ellen.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think you're hearing general support for 3.
Yeah, to explore with the support of the CFO. That's what I've recorded, if that's okay. All right, for what that boiled down to was the creation of a zone where cluster and duplex zoning would be permitted. Is that accurate, Robin? Is that where you landed with your?
Yeah, it would be working towards, drafting a sample zoning, like taking the 2 we have, maybe researching others, working with the planning department and, to help them. And if that's appropriate for us to kind of help draft something that then they could, take and run with kind of thing. But we could do the research and that.
Another SR zone. So you got SR1, SR2, you could have SR3 or something, which would allow your Vancouver size 33 by 100-foot lot sort of thing.
Okay.
Sorry,
Okay, so
sorry, does SR mean single family? SR?
Not residential. It's a
Settlement
zoning
residential.
category.
What does the S mean?
Settlement.
Settlement.
Oh, thank you.
so what I think I'm hearing support for this as well.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Okay. Support for a new SR3. Geez, I thought we were going to be in strategic planning. This is interesting. Okay, changes to the LUB. So the providing incentives to encourage private home builders.
Is that a land use bylaw change, or do we need to change the OCP so that they can then apply for a rezoning, and our OCP would say, if you're doing da 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 da, then you're not going to have to provide goodies?
I guess the answer, it depends. But you can do what's called density bonusing in the Local Government Act, and you can density bone for amenities within the zoning bylaw. So, I mean, the example I gave to the Housing Advisory Committee is the Kates Hill zone has an FSR set of 0.3, and it's like the zoning could say, well, you can build 0.3 for all buildings and structures, and if you build a secondary suite, you can build an additional whatever the number is of floor area, and it'll just be in the zone.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what the question is here.
It's okay, he's answered it.
But the overall question, what is this? Just that council is in support of providing incentives?
Yeah.
Or I
mean,
think it would be, I was going to say just more that should the Housing Advisory Committee like work on a report, like do some research, make some more concrete suggestions. These are just really high level ones. Would it be that you want us to maybe dig into it further and make more concrete suggestions as to what we think would work on Bowen in the Bowen context, doing research, applying it to Bowen? Sorry, Councillor Hawkins.
So what Robin said, are we in support of that?
Oh, definitely in support of that, yeah.
I just get nervous with incentives, thinking it's money and dollars, and no,
No,
this is for
no.
Yeah,
density bonusing and stuff like that.
And this
So
is where I'll refer that paper, or we'll decide whether council will maybe refer that paper from the Islands Trust.
okay, so it's a more detailed report on financial and other incentives to
I
encourage.
don't want any financial from because that implies the muni's giving them money.
They mention the point that was brought up about the social revitalization tax exemption is relevant to
Maybe
that.
just including the revitalization tax exemption.
Okay, all right, so we are in favor of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Encouraging alternative types of land tenure to reduce land costs. Now, specifically what this is working with private property owners for pilot projects to open the door, for example, as we did with the EOI for Area 2, Lot 1. Do we want to open a door to private property owners to encourage them to consider pilot projects?
Could we split these into an A and B?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So talk about A. I'm certainly in favor of that, 100%.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Does the word land tenure, to me, that means who owns the
Land
land,
ownership.
not owning the land and renting out trailer pads. So
I think, Allison, like I would think of that as, meaning different than fee simple
Yeah.
land.
Leasing or collaborative projects or.
I mean, one thing we could suggest is, I don't know, maybe Dan, if it's the right thing, but like, could we research and look at like a different zoning for trailer parks? Like, is that something that would be, because it seemed like, there wasn't a strong objection to that. I don't know if that's one concrete step forward.
I think we have to look at all alternate forms.
May I
got her hand up.
May I speak? I'm just wondering if using the words trailer park model is the right words, because that brings a certain, I don't know, my husband calls them immobile homes, and I heard our mayor talk about them as prefab, and I wonder.
That's a different model.
Well,
It comes
Then
with a
then
stigma.
trailer
I think
park.
it's fair to say trailer parks come with some sort of stigma attached to them.
It sort of forces the mind to go down to tracks of trailer parks I have known, rather than something future, you know. And I think the point is that it's an alternative. And so I personally, I just like you to take out the words trailer park and or trailer park model and just use something different. But the idea of leasing pads seems straightforward. And I just worry about us getting into that whole camping issue and all of that, when we really, what we're talking about here is homes, right? So
well, trailers are homes to a lot of people.
We call them double wides or something rather than trailer park, because there's a really nice one on just off the highway, and as you're driving up to just before Davis Bay, and there's a really nice one with double wides on Salt Spring. And double wides are trailers. Right? They come in, they're all ready to go, and you just put them together and plop them on the pad.
Personally, I don't think it's fair to talk about diversity and then say you can't have trailer parks.
Even if you say mobile homes instead of
mobile homes, good, yeah.
The technical term is manufactured homes, just so you know,
well,
manufactured homes.
Okay, let's use that.
So what I'm hearing, guys, is that there isn't an outright objection to exploring some of these
options,
alternatives, and seeing where that goes. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I hear that.
Okay. All right. Now Gary asked for the second point, serious consideration to a community land trust to be considered separately. Gary, do you want to say a little bit more about why?
It's just another layer that we're not ready for right now, in my mind.
Okay.
It's off in the future.
You're off, Dean.
I think some community land trusts come with funding. They're a new form of, for example, in BC, there's several big ones that can help or can reach out to smaller communities, and they're done through banks and credit unions and things. And they're, I think my idea from going to a few workshops and things, Gary, is quite different from your perspective. So I think it would be really valuable for the committee to explore this a little bit and bring some more info back to council about how it could be useful on Bowen Island, rather than just dismissing it outright. Because I think things have changed, and there's actually funding that can come with these, and I think they might be useful. So I'd like the community to explore them. Or sorry, the committee.
I'll just speak since I got my hand up. I agree with Sue Ellen. I was leaning Gary's way. It seems, okay, this is complicated and hard, but I don't know enough. I just don't know enough. And if there are some opportunities, if it brings other opportunities, such as money, as Sue Ellen said, I have no idea whether that's true or not, but and I read the piece on Orcus, and I've seen that spot on Orcus. It's very nice, or seen some of those projects on Orcus. But when I was reading the Orcus example, wow, this requires a lot of effort. This is hard. So I just don't know. But I would like to know more. So yeah, a little bit of exploration would be useful for me, although I'm worried about the level of effort involved.
So could I leave this with no clear yes, but just we'll explore and get more information back to council?
Well, I guess from my perspective, which is why I have my hand up, there's a lot to be done, and from a priority perspective, that's at the bottom of the pile.
Yeah, I agree with
Yes.
Yeah,
sort of the way I feel. Yeah. Daniel, what's your comment there?
Oh, I was going to comment. It just sounded like where the current wording is give serious consideration to a community land trust. It sounds like inside council wants the Housing Advisory Committee to do research and bring more information to council,
That's good, Daniel.
rather than saying we're doing serious consideration.
That's good.
Yeah.
So change the wording to provide further information on community land trust model.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right.
I'd buy into that, but as long as it does, take up again a lot of staff time and that sort of thing.
So we have 2 more and we have 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Point number 7, I think we've kind of addressed already through point number 4, which is to look into the creation of an SR3 zone.
There's just one clarification in the report. In A, you've talked about the duplex pilot project on Rivendell. I think you meant Kate's Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Rivendell's the road or the street there. Yeah.
Below
Okay.
Rivendell, yeah.
And then
So the duplexes I'm thinking of are the ones on the right as you drive up towards opposite the little park.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
so the final recommendation to encourage proactive rezoning. And this requires identifying and proactively rezoning appropriate lands for diverse housing types. Are we generally in support of doing so? Or is there more to be said here?
I'm in general support.
In general support, it's a huge change. It could be a lot of work for that part of it, but I certainly think we should encourage looking at the zonings and very critically and see if we need any change. That would be my comment.
It's Sue Ellen here. I wonder if we could think about the OCP, like rather than just thinking about it as being a barrier or something that's old. It's only 10 years old and it's got lots of good stuff in it. And I think maybe it's time to revisit it in the context of some of these questions because obviously the world has changed and that's why you update your official community plan. What are the community's needs and preferences? How should we chart the course to the future? What is sustainability for Bowen Island? Those are kinds of questions that are OCP questions in my mind. And I think number 8 here could come after that or along with that. They could inform each other through these kinds of questions. I think these are OCP type questions from being on that steering committee. And so it might be useful to combine the work. And that's my take.
If I could just respond to that, increasingly that's where I'm at as well. Sue Ellen, I think there are some pretty fundamental questions. And obviously this council isn't going to undertake an OCP review. We're too close to the end of our term and we have too much else on our plate. But it probably would be wise for us as a council to express support of the next elected council undertaking that OCP review, because 10 years is a long time.
That also might be, if depending on what this committee thinks, would an OCP update or review, would that be a good thing in terms of addressing the housing challenge, diverse housing challenges on Bowen Island? Maybe you want to make a recommendation about whether we should look at the OCP. I'll just leave that with you.
I think to Maureen's point, I think that's a really good idea. The OCP isn't going to get redone in the near future, but I think we should look at some of the changes that should be done, and that could help out the next council. Well, those will be our thoughts on it, and help out the next council when they do the OCP.
Yes, definitely a purview, I think, of the next council.
Yeah,
and it would only hold back some of the work that we're trying to get on with here. It will ultimately be helpful, but I just don't think we could wait for the OCP to be completed.
So we're 1 minute to 12, and I'm going to turn it back to whoever.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think this one, it's interesting to look at, but because it's not something we should bite off at this point. And
Yeah.
I don't,
It's interesting in that it was one of the strongest points in Rob Purdy's presentation. And we're hearing this from the developers. The pre-zoning makes
oh
such
yeah,
a huge difference.
totally.
Yes.
But it's going to involve at this point in the thing, it's going to be, you know, contentious, because who are you going to give the upzoning to? I mean, the only area I can think of to look at, which we deferred because of the sewer, is the strip along Miller Road.
Yeah.
So to me, we haven't got that dealt with, so we really can't deal with it. And if you're going to look at, the only other thing might be to remove the section of the OCP that talks about density transfer into the code. But other than those two specifics, I don't think we can really, we haven't got the time or anything else to try and deal with that if we want to deal with all these other things.
I think there's other parts of this that don't include the OCP, like DCCs and community amenities and that sort of thing. I think should be very high on the priority list. And they don't involve OCP changes or anything.
Right, right on.
So I pulled you through those 8 points. Somebody needs to bring this to a close.
Yes, please. No offense, I have a 12 o'clock. I must rush
I
up to
have
it.
to go too. So
Yeah,
is there
so
anything
I think
else?
we've got clear direction. Maybe Mayor Andrew, I'll hand it to you to close the meeting.
Hang
Okay,
on.
well, Sue Ellen, go ahead.
I'd like to move that the Committee of the Whole receive the Housing Advisory Committee report dated October 8th, 2021, and recommend that the committee
Consider the comments provided by.
thank
council.
you. Consider
Yeah.
the comments contributed during the Committee of the Whole from council.
Sure, I'll second that.
Yes.
And
All
no
in
more
favor, aye,
discussion.
got
All
no.
in favor, aye.
Okay.
Aye, aye. Okay, thank you, everybody. An incredible conversation. It could have gone on a lot longer. Robin, you did an outstanding job. Thank you, Sheila, Sophie, Fritz, good to see you. Who else is in there? Daniel, thank you all.
Oh.
Well done.
Thanks,